Sego, it's May 26th. Welcome to Let's Talk Native on the LTN Radio Network. This program breaks all the rules for Native radio. No buffalo speeches, no mystic healing, no special Indian prayers. We tackle the real issues facing Native people with look back at our glorious and our grave history, a tough look at where we're at now, and look forward to our ongoing battles for sovereignty and autonomy. Let's Talk Native is produced in association with Iroquois Promotions on the LTN Radio Network, streaming live from the Cattaraugus territory of the Seneca Nation, and rebroadcast on the Gwe, CKWE in Tandanega, as well as being rebroadcast on Netroots Radio, Real People's Media, and Indigenous Resistance Radio. We have a phone line available to us, and I'll give that number right now. And that number is, let me check. 855-967-0463. That's the number to call to join in on the conversation. We've got a specific topic we're going to talk about today, so I encourage anybody who wants to weigh in. You can find us streaming with crystal clear audio at www.ltnradionet.com. That is our website. That is how you access the LTN Radio Network. And, of course, we are streaming live on Facebook. If you're listening and you'd like to see the conversation as well as hear the conversation, you can check us out here on Facebook. Otherwise, you can stream us live on the LTN Radio Net. Of course, we will post the shows up immediately, and I know folks will check it out afterwards. And of course, we welcome your comments. Not only we welcome you to call again 855-967-0463. But also, since we are Facebook streaming, Facebook live streaming, you can add your comments, offer your comments. I don't care if it's a shot at us or a shot for us. We'd welcome it, and we might, if we like what you say, and even if we don't like what you say, we might give your comment a mention here on the air. So that's what we got. All right. Well, let me mention the opening song was "Do It Anyway" by John McLeod. Okay, I'm just reading a note here by John McLeod. Look, we're going to feature a little bit of John's music today. John might be making it out this way in July, so we look forward to that. And so maybe we'll try to get some people a little bit more familiarized with his music. We play it here fairly often, but we'll give it a special shot today. Our studio engineer is Kelly McMillan, and she helps keep us going, even get us through our hurdles with some of our technical difficulties on occasion. And it looks like we're out of mic today. Is that what you just shake your head? Okay, all right. That is pretty well out. Well, I don't know what we'll do about that in the short term, but what you got anything down there on the compression side? All right. All right, there you go. All right. Hey, here's what I want to talk about today, and maybe the best way to set it up. I'll set up a little bit. We'll play some news footage. What's that? Channel 7. Yeah, from Channel 7 in Buffalo. As many of you know, I've talked about the Seneca Nation and their revenue sharing agreement with the state. Frankly, I was critical of it. I was critical of it for 14 years. But the thing about that agreement is that it had a term to it, and that term was for 14 years. And that term came up last December. Without a whole lot of fanfare. In fact, it's almost like the state of New York and the municipalities who get some of that revenue back from the state of New York. Understanding the Seneca Nation was giving, at least in the later part of this revenue share, 25% of the net slot drop. That's the slot revenue minus the payouts. Not minus any of the overhead, but just minus the payouts. 25% of that in the last 7 years has been going to the state. Now, 25% of that for the revenue from each one of those three casinos was going to the municipalities at or about those casinos. So Niagara Falls was getting 25% of what the state got from the Niagara Falls casino back. And as such, Buffalo Creek, the city of Buffalo would, and as for the Seneca Allegheny Casino, the city of Salamanca would get 25% of the revenue generated to the state back to them. So just to kind of put it in perspective. Now, once that term ended, what the Seneca Nation realized was that the state and all three municipalities were still putting money in their budget for 2017. So the Seneca Nation said, I don't know if you guys aren't paying attention here or what, but that ended in December. We've got one more payment that we're going to make on, I think it was on March 1st or March 31st, which brought it up to the end of 2016. But that's the term. Now, to be clear here, this wasn't a strategy decision. This was not a revenge decision based on the fact that their exclusivity was not worth nearly what they paid into the state. They paid $1.5 billion into the state over 14 years. Certainly, the exclusivity that actually diminished in value as time went on because of the state infringing upon that exclusivity, both with racetracks that they were putting into casinos and ultimately doing a referendum that allowed them to develop Class 3 gaming. Clearly, the exclusivity diminished in value as time went on, while the Seneca Nation continued to invest in their gaming. So the revenue increased almost year by year. It flatlined at the end, but it increased year by year as the Seneca Nation invested $1 billion into their gaming with additional sites, with expanded gaming floors, and all kinds of other things. But come December of 2016, the revenue sharing ended. That was the term, and it was negotiated 14 years ago, 15 years ago. This was always in the compact. There's nothing new here. The compact is very, very clear. It had a sliding scale of percentage, 18% for year 1 through 4, 22% for year 5 through 7, and 25% through year 8 through 14, and nothing mentioned. As Tom Precious said, the compact seems to be silent beyond 14 years. Yeah, it's silent. It means that there's nothing in there. So even though the compact was for 14 years with an automatic renewal for another 7 years after that 14 years, that what renewed in that the additional 7 years are just the terms of the regulatory stuff. There's no mention of any renewal of revenue sharing, and of course, this is essentially the Seneca Nation's out of a bad deal. And you got to give the Seneca Nation some credit for even though they probably paid far more than the exclusivity was worth, they at least had the foresight to say, we're not going to do it forever. It is a 14-year term. So when the Seneca Nation makes the announcement and tells the state and the municipalities, look, the payments are done, the news wanted to characterize it that this was that somehow the Seneca Nation was stopping payments and that they are withholding payments and that they are going in a new direction. No, this is the old direction prescribed 14 years ago. And it can't be more clear. But so they make that announcement. Now the state says, well, we don't think that's right. Now the three municipalities, Niagara Falls, Buffalo, and Salamanca, they're like scratching their heads. It's like they're pretending, and I gotta say pretending, like they didn't know. The reality is we've got some pretty good indication that some people had raised this issue, especially in Niagara Falls. They said, there's nothing in the compact that says anything about payments past 14 years. So the immediate feedback was, well, let's call the state, and the state says, no, we'll get money out of them. And of course we've played some of the audio clip from the Ways and Means chairman who said, no, my Seneca tells me they're going to continue to pay. And of course, that's absurd. But here's the latest development. Here's the latest development. The latest development is, and if you recall Paul Deister, Paul Deister, the mayor of Niagara Falls, seems to have the ability to stay in office regardless of his skill set there. But if you go back to 2013, as the the conflict over the breach of the exclusivity was coming to an end. And so here's what happened. In a 4-year period, the Seneca Nation said, we're going to follow the terms of the compact, which is when there is a dispute over the compact, we will escrow the money over the revenue sharing. We will escrow the money and enter and initiate the arbitration clause to resolve the conflict. So that's what the Seneca Nation did. The arbitration dragged on. The state dragged on their end of it. Now, even during that period, for 4 years now, they escrowed the money for this for the revenue sharing. But during that period, they said, we could still work something out and pay the local, the municipalities, the local governments. We're just not going to pay the state. But however we resolve this conflict, because they know this was in, they were still in the middle of that term. They wanted to make sure that the state credited them for anything they paid the local municipalities as they resolved this conflict. And the state refused. So obviously the Seneca Nation could not make payments to Niagara Falls, Buffalo, and Salamanca during this 4-year period. So the monies got held up. The state could have gone ahead and paid them. They were going to get, they're the ones who made the obligations, right? And they were the ones who actually breached the agreement. But that's not the way it worked out. So for 4 years, this thing languished as arbitration was underway. But and the worst vitriol that was coming out of the governor himself and the mayor of Niagara Falls. The mayor of Niagara Falls had gone so far as to say that he was going to withhold any fire service and emergency services from the casino. He actually, on television, so this isn't just something that could be misquoted because of the way it was written or whatever else. He actually said on television, in a television interview, that the patrons of the casino, they may be gamblers, but they may not want to gamble with their lives by going to a casino that does not have a fire department that'll service them. I mean, that's literally what the mayor said. I actually called him out on it and had a real fun exchange on WBEN, the morning news, when they had settled their agreement. And of course, here's how the settlement worked out. And they did settle it. And the Seneca Nation said, okay, we'll work this out. And so what they did is they kept a third of the money that was escrowed. The Seneca Nation did. So what the state did was they essentially surrendered $200 million for their breach of the exclusivity clause of the gaming compact. They surrendered $200 million. Actually, it was over to that, but just to round it off, $600 million was escrowed when all was said and done over that 4-year period of time, and the state gave up $200 million of it so they could move forward. And they signed an MOU, and there were certain things that the state had to do. They had to stop calling their racetrack casinos. They had to stop calling their slot parlors. They had to call them racinos, and they had to refer to their slot machines as video lottery terminals. A technical word, but honestly, they look and they play. They're actually the same machines as a slot machine. The difference between a video lottery terminal and a slot machine, the class of machine, has to do with how they are computer linked and how the house accumulates the money to pay. But as far as a patron sitting there putting money in a machine, pulling a handle, or pressing a play, they are, for all intents and purposes, they're slot machines. But the state would no longer call them that. There was also in the MOU some clauses about how the state would itemize their billing for services they provide in terms of the gaming regulatory part of the deal, and the Seneca Nation would be timely with paying each quarter. So that was the agreement. There was no mention about extending this thing past the 14 years. It was never even entertained in the MOU. So, but again, I think it's important that people realize what level of threats. Well, and to suggest what the governor was saying, the governor was saying was calling down the Seneca Nation. He was saying the Seneca Nation are bad partners, that they're cheating, they're withholding, what they're saying isn't true. I mean, there were any number of insults were being hurled both by Governor Cuomo and Mayor Deister as this thing raged on. When they settled it, they were all smiles. They did a press conference and all shook hands and pretended to be friends. And where I got into it with Paul Deister on a live radio interview at WBN, when I was asked about who the winners and losers were, and I said, well, Niagara Falls was going to be made whole. The state is the one who breached the agreement. And so they're the winners in this thing. They got some money in spite of the breach. The Seneca Nation weren't big winners. They kept $200 million, but frankly, the breach probably cost them well more than that. But I went on to say that I thought both the governor and the mayor owed the Seneca people an apology for the harsh words and the threats that were made while this money was being escrowed in complete compliance with the gaming compact. Deister lost his mind. He started dropping F-bombs and then when I said, look, you're the one who threatened to withhold fire support, and he said that's not true. And so for the whole weekend, WBN played his interviews on television, all the audio over and over again. Clearly, Deister looked like an idiot, and you would think that he would have learned a lesson from that. So that brings me to now. So we'll go ahead and we'll play this came out on Wednesday of this week. Channel 7 carried it. And this is an excerpt from the interview and from the news coverage. And then we'll talk about it afterwards. But we'll go ahead. We'll go and play that.
In March, the Seneca Nation announced it would be stopping payments previously made to the state. According to the Senecas, its obligation to pay the state, outlined in the 2002 compact, had ended.
Those revenues support a number of activities of the city government that are important to citizens, and I want our citizens to know that we're going to fight for their right to receive those revenues.
Enter these photos taken Wednesday of DPW crews measuring the width of the parking lot entrances to the Seneca Niagara Casino.
Without getting too specific, we also want to make sure here in the city of Niagara Falls that people understand we're not helpless in this matter and that we're going to keep all of our options open.
Why would that be relevant later on?
I'm not going to comment on that. I think you can probably figure that out on your own.
The implication in measuring the casino entrances is the city would block or barricade them if it doesn't get paid.
So there you go. That's Paul Deister putting on a show. First off, let's talk about what the Dog and Pony show was. He put a couple of city workers out in front of the casino with measuring devices. I joked to calling them, saying that they're out there with rulers, but he took some city workers out there to measure the entrances to the casino. And although he didn't want to say it on air, he had clearly indicated that they were measuring it for a possible blockade of the entrances to the casino. First off, so when he did that, when he put his city workers out there, he made sure that they were accompanied by a photographer. The pictures that were on the news were not from Channel 7. They were supplied to Channel 7 by the mayor's office. So he puts a bunch of guys there rolling a little measuring device and takes some pictures and then sends it to Channel 7 to say, oh, look what I'm doing. Now, to be clear here, they don't need to measure these entrances. They've got maps. They've got aerial maps. They've got drawings. They've got schematics. They got everything they could possibly need. But this is Paul Deister putting on his little show. So he sends this over to Channel 7 to say, if they're not going to pay us, we'll block their casino. That's the implication. And of course, it's absurd. There is no freaking way that Paul Deister is going to be able to block a casino entrance. For one thing, there's safety issues. Most of the employees at all of Seneca Gaming are non-native. So he's messing with a significant number of jobs, especially Niagara Falls, because that is essentially the flagship enterprise of Seneca Gaming, of the Seneca Gaming Corp. So this idle threat that somehow he's going to fight, and that he is keeping its options open to show that they're not powerless. Well, let's be clear here. For their right. He is insisting that the money is owed to him, to the city. And this could not be farther from the truth. Let me back up a little bit and talk about the Indian Gaming Regulatory Act. I know I've talked about it before, but it could not be more clear. The Indian Gaming Regulatory Act, when it passed, and there's a lot of different opinions on why it was rushed through Congress. First off, there was a Supreme Court case that went all the way up to the all the way up to the Supreme Court, involving a California community, California Native territory, where they were doing high stakes bingo. It wasn't even a casino, and it's called the Cabazon case. It went all the way to the Supreme Court in I think it was in '87. The Supreme Court ruled that that they could do gaming. They didn't give them the right, but they recognized that the Cabazons had the right to do gaming, even and it didn't require state permission. If the state was doing gaming, there's no way the state could say that the native territories couldn't do it. So the Cabazon case showed that the states did not have the power to stop native territories from gaming. Now, there are some that would suggest that it opened up the floodgates for the potential for Class 3 gaming, and it clearly it didn't give us the right, but what it did was in the highest court of the United States, it acknowledged that the federal government and the state governments didn't have the right to stop us. So it was a recognition of our sovereignty. It wasn't a granting. Courts don't grant sovereignty. They don't legislate sovereignty. They may make rulings that infringe upon it, but they certainly don't create sovereignty from nothing. And Cabazon didn't do it either. So what happens is the Congress says, well, we better do something, because there may be a proliferation of high stakes bingo, other high stakes Class 2 gaming, and frankly even Class 3 gaming. So what they did is they passed the Indian Gaming Regulatory Act. The claim was, and I don't necessarily buy all this, but the claim for passing the Indian Gaming Regulatory Act was to protect Native people. Yeah, believe it or not, that's what they claim. That by passing IGRA, they would protect Native territories from nefarious types, organized crime, and they would also protect them from aggressive states. The original version of IGRA actually compelled the states to negotiate gaming compacts with Native peoples desiring to do so. That was challenged in Supreme Court by the state of Florida, and they claimed that congressional protections would not allow an act of Congress to place them in a situation where they could be brought into court against their will. So they had to strike that provision that essentially mandated states compact with the Native territories. But the out clause was, if the states refused, the Native people could just pursue this with some sort of negotiation with the federal government. But regardless, so what happens is they lay out certain rules with IGRA. Among those clear regulations within IGRA is the regulation not against Native people, but the regulation against the state. And what the regulation is, it says, basically, it's clear that the states cannot tax Native gaming. Let me say it again. The states cannot tax Native gaming. In other words, the states are entitled to no revenue from Native gaming. They can't strong arm them for money. They can't squeeze them for money. They can't attempt to prohibit them or shut them down because they want revenue. Now, there's a provision in there that says if the state, through the regulatory relationship established in a gaming compact, incurs some costs, they can negotiate in the compact a way for those costs to be covered. And that's what I referred to when we talked about the state sending an itemized bill for their cost for regulation, which could include the services by their police forces and that kind of stuff. But that was not revenue for the state. That was supposed to just cover offset costs that the states may have incurred. Now there is an allowance though for revenue sharing, but that allowance is and it's very clear. And the Interior Department is the agency that essentially establishes the standard for this. And what they established for a standard was that for revenue sharing not to be a tax, the state would have to concede something of value for that revenue sharing. And the standard was that the concession had to be both substantial and quantifiable. That's from the Interior Department. That's from the federal government. This is the federal government telling the states the rules for revenue sharing. Now, by substantial, it means that the concession has to be somewhat equal or of equal value to the revenue that the native territory is going to share with you. And of course, the quantifiable standard says you've got to be able to determine that it has that value. You just can't say, okay, the exclusivity that New York State gave the Seneca Nation was worth $1.5 billion, which is what the Seneca Nation actually paid. No, it can't be quantifiable based on what the revenue sharing is. It has to be quantifiable based on some sort of market analysis or whatever else. So that's the standard. So I think it's important that people understand that the state and, as such, the municipalities have nothing coming if they aren't offering something. Look, we're at the bottom of the hour, so we're going to take a break here. And when we come back, I want to talk a little bit more about this entitlement, this sense of entitlement that Paul Deister and folks at the state feel that they have. And we'll get into that a little bit more when we come back. This is John Kane. This is Let's Talk Native.
Yeah, they call me the breed. Well, that don't bother me no how. Yeah, they call me the breed. My Indian blood serves me well. I live in California, I chill in Arizona. I like it here, I do like it down here. Yeah, they call me the breed. Firelight and is my charm. Yeah, they call me the breed. Do Indian medicine all night long. Some spirits, they talk to me. Others walk right through me. They call me here. My relations down here. Breed. I call my Harley old midnight. Yeah, they call me the breed. My desert eagle makes things right. Some women like to stone me, others like to hold me. They like me here, I like the women down here.
All right, that's a little bit more John McLeod. That's the breed, not the breeze, the breeds of, if it sounds familiar. That's another track from John McLeod, one that we don't usually play. Most of what we play from Three of a Kind, which is a CD that is just very, very popular CD, and some great music on that. Maybe we'll even go out with one of his songs. I don't know. But all right, hey, Let's Talk Native is sponsored by Ross and Holly John and the RJE family of businesses, Eric White and ERW Enterprises, Robert Delamonte and Tuscarora Woodworks, by individuals like my good friend here, Ed Schindler, Tracy Brown, Cynthia Trice, Scott Snyder, Neville Spring, my friend Sugar Montour, and many others who have helped the program in the past and really helped the program to continue to educate, entertain, and inform for the last 7 years. I thank all of you for joining in the fight and for doing your part. I also want to thank Unity Stream and Apache Radio Net for providing our streaming capabilities and giving us the platform for the LTN radio network. I also want to thank CKWE for doing the simulcast and the rebroadcast, and for providing us with the number to call. Again, I know this is a very specific topic, but it's one that if you want to join into the conversation, you certainly can give us a call. You can call us at 855-967-0463. And the reason I have to thank CKWE for that is because they are actually providing us with the phone service. So when you make that call, you're actually calling CKWE, and we patch them back into our soundboard here. So I want to thank them. I also want to thank Netroots Radio again, Real People's Media, and Indigenous Resistance Radio, and all of you who share the Facebook Live feeds, the audio feeds, and all the other stuff that we post up on Let's Talk Native group page and on the Let's Talk group page, the page that's associated with my show in New York. I thank you all for that. Again, I wanted to make clear that under federal law, and I want to be clear, this federal law, it governs, it's the underlying federal law that regulates the states. And I would argue it regulates them more than it regulates us. Federal law, neither the Cabazon case, so neither the Supreme Court nor IGRA gave us the right to do gaming. We had that right. The Supreme Court case just acknowledged it. And what IGRA attempted to do, although they claimed it was to protect us, what they attempted to do was to bolster the state's position to be involved in this part of our commerce. Because let's be clear, we don't do much with the state when it comes to our commerce. We don't pay state taxes, and that's why tobacco and gas has been one of the mainstays of our economic development. So this was a federal statute that essentially gave the states certain authorities, but also limited that authority. And the limitation was that they could not tax it. I mean, there's lots of limitations, but among the limitations was that the state, as such, the state's municipalities cannot strong arm the native, our facilities. And for Paul Deister to suggest that he could somehow block the entrances to the casinos in Niagara Falls, block the entrances to the Seneca Native territory, the Seneca Nation's territory up there, it would be tantamount to them trying to block the roads here on just off the territory of Cattaraugus or just off of our community of Allegheny. I mean, it's an absurd proposition. It's illegal on many different levels. I almost wish he would attempt it because, first off, the Seneca Nation would clear whatever barricades they have there, and in all likelihood, Deister would find his ass sued. Yeah, I think Matt would be right there, and I would encourage Native people. In fact, maybe the whole idea is somebody ought to go up to Paul Deister's home address and measure the opening of his driveway. Maybe that would be something worth considering. But I mean, think about the jobs here. I mean, if I was a non-Native employee of Seneca Gaming, I'd seriously consider suing Paul Deister myself. I'm not suggesting that the Seneca Nation needs to go into a court, but a non-Native employee whose job is being threatened by the antics of this crazy mayor, certainly that could happen. He has, he's making it sound like that he is entitled, that he has his. I mean, and the thing is, this is where I still am very critical of the media covering this stuff, because even as Channel 7 in this news footage talks about the compact, and they even put a little excerpt up there. They keep saying things like the Senecas believe that they don't have to pay anymore. The terms of the compact are clear. Why don't you guys be real journalists and state the facts? Why don't you question whether the state has any legitimate claim for the revenue? And of course, Niagara Falls. I mean, when the comments were said, well, yeah, there was something in the MOU about continuing to pay. Well, then produce it. Let the state produce some portion of the compact that suggests payments continue past 14 years. Let them produce some portion or something out of the MOU that suggests they have a valid claim for revenue to continue past 14 years. They can't, they won't, they're unable to because it doesn't exist. Yet, instead of saying the state believes they have a right to revenue, they say the Seneca Nation believes they have that they don't have to pay. And of course, they keep characterizing it as a decision that the Seneca Nation is just somehow just making. Let's be clear. Cuomo wasn't in office back in 2002. Pataki was. So not only is it, you got to go back Cuomo, and before Cuomo was Patterson, before Patterson was Spitzer, and then before Spitzer was Pataki. So that's how many governors have been in the mix. Oh, some of them were pretty short time, like Spitzer. But you got to go back that far to not only a different governor, but a different party in office that negotiated the terms of this. Many of the same Senecas are involved in the gaming that were involved in 2002. So that the guard hasn't changed much here, but the guard has certainly changed on the state side. So it is really clear, and again, there's been pretty good indication from some of the conversations that have taken place after the Seneca Nation said that the payments had come to an end, that there were people both in the city of Niagara Falls and at the state level, and frankly, even some of the other city of Buffalo as well, that they knew that they had a compact issue coming up. And now, but I want to be clear here. This is not a compact dispute. This isn't about breaching the compact. So when anybody says, well, then the Seneca Nation and the state need to sit down and negotiate a settlement of this. No, they don't. The Seneca Nation has no, there's nothing that suggests they have to sit down with the state. It is not incumbent on them to resolve a conflict. There is no conflict. The compact is clear. Now, if the state somehow has something very lucrative that they want to offer the Senecas for a revenue share and create a new one, the Senecas said, we'll talk to you about that. I don't know what they could possibly offer. The whole exclusivity thing, it didn't quite work out. They breached it almost immediately. The terms of the compact actually provided a mechanism for them to breach it. And of course, now the state is involved in Class 3 gaming on the fringe of what that exclusivity zone was, just on the other side of Rochester. And here's the other thing, and I've said this before: the best security that the Seneca Nation has for competition, from a competition standpoint, is the fact that they don't pay the state anything. That ended in December. Anybody else who gets a gaming license from the state of New York is paying the state of New York like 45% of the revenue. They're taxed at a rate of 45%. So is anybody in the right mind going to build a casino in the shadow of the Seneca Nation's enterprises? Of course not. How are they going to get the financing? Who would finance a $500 million build of a casino that has a 45% disadvantage against their closest competitor? Of course nobody's going to do that. In fact, I would argue that, what is it called? Delago out there on the other side of Rochester. I would argue that the casino that is closest to the Seneca Nation, if those benefactors, if the investors there knew that the Seneca Nation were made very aware that the Seneca Nation was no longer going to be paying 25%, and we can talk about what that 25% really equals in a second here. But if they knew the Seneca Nation was no longer going to pay the state, I'll bet the rate that they were going to be charged for the financing would have increased dramatically. Look, everything is based on the security of the lending apparatus, and part of what made the Seneca Nation's their build outs, their initial money, they paid a lot of money for, but as they established themselves and they proved that they could run a gaming facility and make money, the bond rating for Seneca Nation increased year by year by year because it's based on production. It's based on your ability to generate revenue. I would argue that the folks who financed that build on the thruway on the other side of Rochester, if they knew all of a sudden that their competition down the road, and they got to be worried about what the Oneidas are going to do. I mean, because let's face it, if the Oneidas say, you know what, we're not sure that this revenue sharing thing makes any sense for us either. I'm not saying they're going to do that, but the Seneca Nation clearly had no problem watching this thing turn out because, frankly, they weren't getting anything of value for the $1.5 billion that they sent to New York State. So that's the first thing. But let's, again, that 25%, and I mentioned it a little bit earlier, but let me break that down a little bit because when you consider the dollars that go into a slot machine, then the money gets paid out for the prize money, right? The payouts of the slot machine. 25% of that money sitting in the bucket was going to New York State. So the 75% that remained, that doesn't just go to the Seneca Nation. No, a big portion of that went to the operation. They had to cover the cost of the building, the cost of the machines, whether it was a lease or a purchase. They had employees to cover. They had a ton of overhead. That 25% that the state took right off the top was probably closer to 45 or 48% of the actual revenue once you consider that all of the costs for the operation came out of the Seneca Nation, 75%. On top of that, and I mentioned this also, is that the Seneca Nation invested more money into the gaming. What did the state do with its 25%? It squandered it. 25% of their 25% went back to the municipalities. And so what did Niagara Falls do? What did the great Paul Deister do with $100 million that came his way over the last 14 years? He filled potholes. He filled in the shortfalls that struggling city has had for years. Now, because he became so dependent on that money, now he's crying foul. That's his own management issues. That isn't because the Seneca Nation is responsible for keeping Niagara Falls afloat. That's not what that revenue is even supposed to go for. In fact, George Maciarz and other state officials said, look, we don't want Paul Deister just taking all that money and throwing it into city coffers. There was supposed to be money invested in the city, enhancing the city. $100 million has gone into Niagara Falls from the Seneca Nation off of this revenue share alone. More than that has gone there, but off this revenue share alone. And what has Paul Deister done to increase revenue with that money? Nothing. In fact, now the city is completely desperate. Now it's more dependent. It's dependent, he claims, on revenue that he hopes and wishes and claims that he's entitled to, which he's not. Now, let me talk about this also. Beyond the $100 million that went to Niagara Falls, the $1.5 billion that went to the state, the Seneca Nation has thrown money at the Culinary Institute. It's thrown money at hospitals. It's thrown money into city programs, beautification programs. They've also sponsored events throughout all of Western New York. The Seneca Nation has spent over $1 billion on the region, not just enhancing their gaming development. This is the money that the Seneca Nation has done on their dime. And what has the state done? The state squandered the money. And in fact, they not only squandered the money that they received, they actually had to forfeit $200 million because of their breach of the compact. Now, here's my news to Paul Deister. Look, your governor has casinos. Beg him for the money. Stop trying to threaten the Seneca Nation. Stop trying to threaten the jobs that the Seneca Nation has created. Stop trying to threaten and play, be some sort of tough guy. It hasn't worked out in the past. You look like a moron doing this stuff. So my message to Paul Deister, put your hat in your hand and go see Prince Andrew. He's got a casino just on the fringe of the exclusivity of what was the exclusivity zone. He's got these racetrack casinos. He's got lotteries. He's sucking money out of Niagara Falls every single day with these lotteries. So, not to mention the money that he's sucking out of Niagara Falls because the state gets all the revenue from the state park on the falls. Go to Prince Andrew for your money.
So they're still going to be paying for their like fire department and whatever city charges that the casino incurs, correct? I mean,
and that offer has been very, very clear from the start. Beyond the potential for some sort of revenue sharing or programs the Seneca Nation is willing to do that would benefit the city, what they've said right from the get-go: if you have costs incurred because of our casinos being your neighbors, send the bill. We'll pay it. So the Seneca Nation is never
totally not paying anything.
Yeah, they're not stiffing. I mean, because the other threat that the Deister is making is that he's going to shut off the sewage system. So what is he going to back up the toilets in the casino or something like that? And of course, no, you can't do that either, you moron. Saying stuff like that is just stupid stuff that he's saying. But the fact of the matter is, the Seneca Nation made it very clear. let's itemize the cost that you're incurring, and we'll make you whole on that stuff. But you know what? You're not going to get $20 million a year again. Mm-hmm. That ship has sailed. It ended in December. I mean, he's according to the news report, he's expecting $4 million a quarter. Actually, the folks that I've talked to said no, he's expecting $5 million a quarter. He is basically drawing a line in the sand. If I don't get my $20 million, I'm gonna raise hell with the Senecas. And of course, notably silent is the governor. The governor hasn't said a word. Yeah, and of course the news keeps saying, well, the Seneca Nation says that they're waiting for the governor to call so they can sit at the table. Look, the Seneca Nation didn't put the offer out to meet with the state on this thing. They put the offer out to Niagara Falls, Buffalo, and Salamanca. When the governor's office called, they said, yeah, we're always willing to talk. But it isn't to negotiate a settlement on this revenue sharing dispute. Unless the governor has something really compelling to offer, that isn't going to happen.
But he blew that out of the water already by building the Del Lago and the continuation of Buffalo and Batavia, the racetracks. I mean, those are that's been a big thorn in their side for the longest time anyway.
Well, and Todd Gates at the president of Seneca Nation said during his State of the Nation address, the State of Seneca Nation address, that if the state doesn't begin complying or fulfill its commitment in the MOU that said they would itemize their billing, they're not going to pay any of the state fees associated with rate. They're going to self-regulate. So right now, the space between the Seneca Nation and the state is getting pretty massive. The space between them, but the Seneca Nation made it very clear to Niagara Falls. And in fact, if the mayor of Niagara Falls wants a fight, the Seneca Nation can certainly roll up that red carpet they rolled out to him and said, "Look, forget you. We don't want you at the table." There are other people, even in Niagara Falls, that we can meet with. We can meet with community organizations. We can meet with other economic development agencies. We can meet with the unions. We can meet with the county. We don't need the city. The city. If you're screwing yourself, you're screwing yourself. And frankly, that's what Paul Deister's doing. He is screwing the city out of any potential to have a seat at the table with the Seneca Nation. Buffalo and Salamanca aren't doing this. But he keeps insisting that he's lined up with the governor on this thing. The governor is leaving Paul Deister out to hang here. The governor isn't offering all of even some of the harsh language that he used during the dispute involving the escrow account. So the governor isn't saying a word right now. And of course, the governor's got a lot of other things on his plate. He's mired in all kinds of corruption issues at the state level. This is probably the last thing he needs is an Indian problem. Go ahead, Ed.
I just wanted to point out to the listeners that this is very similar in that they want to take from us. Okay, with nothing coming to them, they want to take it as if they're entitled to it, and that's been true throughout history. They've taken land. They've taken our children. They've taken all kinds of things from us. Language, literally made it illegal to carry out our ceremonies. You take a look at the history, and you find that these people are basically taking a position that they're entitled to what we have.
Well, and again, they're superior. That's the whole thing. This is about casting us beneath them, like somehow they can control everything that we do. And for a mayor to do this, the last time I saw a mayor this arrogant was in Oka. Mm-hmm. The guy who wanted to expand a golf course on the Mohawk territory. That didn't exactly work out very well. Well, and if this guy thinks that he's going to block entrances to the casino, I mean, it is such a silly, a buffoonish act that he did. The idea of putting guys out there measuring the width of the driveways. I mean, it is really absurd. And the thing is, I hope this is finally a stupid enough act and an antagonistic enough act that the folks of Niagara Falls will finally stop voting this moron back into office. And of course, the only reason he's in there now is because two people ran against him and they split the vote. Otherwise, he wouldn't be in there right now. More people voted against Deister the last election. And you know what? There's got to be city council members who want to separate themselves from this guy. I don't know who's advising him. There's no way that I can believe that the governor's advising him. But you know what? The governor was in town last week, and maybe the governor said, go for it. Do what you got to do. And maybe that's the position that he took with and that's a signal that Deister took to do this thing. But there's no way the governor said, "Oh yeah, go ahead and block the roads." There's no way that this governor. I mean, I'm not saying because I think much of him. I'm not saying that, but he would know better. But Paul Deister, he doesn't know any better. This is the moron who's going to threaten to not let a fire department or an ambulance go there if somebody got hurt. This is a guy who's perfectly willing to jeopardize the health and safety and well-being of non-native people. I mean, again, I can't emphasize enough. The people in those buildings, both the employees and the patrons, are not native people for the most part. We're a small minority of the people who not only work there, but go there as consumers. He is really doing this stuff to hurt his own people. And then the news, I mean, and shame on Channel 7. They pull some guy walking his kids in a baby carriage saying, what do you think? Yeah, and he says, well, yeah, I think they should pay. I mean, to ask somebody who knows nothing about the overriding and underlying federal law, the Indian Gaming Regulatory Act, and ask, what do you think? That opinion means nothing. And I'm not trying to just dismiss somebody, but if you explain the facts of the law, and shame on the news for not breaking it down, for not doing their own journalistic investigation to say, yes, IGRA prohibits the states from trying to strong-arm these people. Yes, IGRA and the Interior Department says that if there is a revenue sharing, that it has to be both substantial and quantifiable. They're not producing any of that stuff. They'll say, oh, the Seneca Nation says. No, that's what the federal government is saying. So shame on them for some of the silly claims that they're making and the way that they're characterizing this. This was a deal that was made over 14 years ago. It had a 14-year term to it. It ended in December, period. This isn't about whether the Seneca Nation was unhappy with the revenue sharing agreement. I mean, that notwithstanding, this is about the thing having a term to it. And it's impossible for the New York State to offer an exclusivity zone if they've got 3 racetracks with slot parlors in it, and they're tapping in. Look, just because Del Lago is outside of the exclusivity zone doesn't mean that it's not close enough on the fringe that it's tapping into the market that was the gaming market that the Seneca Nation reaches. So there's no question the Seneca Nation needs that 25% back, or that 48%, whatever you want to call it, because it is becoming an ever crowded field of gaming enterprises. The state is one of their competitors, and in fact, that's the other reason for the Seneca Nation to say, look, we don't need you in our business. We don't need you regulating our casino. You got your own casinos to regulate. The idea, I mean, in what industry? I mean, would the automotive industry say, okay, Chrysler's going to let Ford see their books, their competition? So the idea that the state gets to have unfettered access to the gaming operation of the Seneca Nation while they're competing against it, no, that doesn't fly. That doesn't fly.
I think it should be also pointed out that there were a lot of Seneca people who did not agree with the compact, okay? But the Seneca Nation's position was that they agreed to the compact and therefore they would carry out their responsibilities. And that's not pointed out, that what was agreed upon was what the Seneca people carried out. And when there wasn't an agreement, like you said, 4 years, put it in escrow and go to arbitration. That's what was done.
And that was during the term that thing existed. But yes, you're right. It was a small majority, or a small margin by which the Seneca Nation approved this compact. Mm-hmm. And I got to tell you, I believe that some people voted for the compact thinking that any of the flaws in it would be caught by the Interior Department. I heard that conversation made. And you know, when the Interior Department looked at this compact, you know what they did? They said, we're not going to approve this thing. Now, what does that mean? Well, here's the thing. The Interior Department has 3 choices it can make. It could approve a gaming compact, it can reject it, or they could punt. And they punted. And I would argue that the biggest flaw in the compact had to do with the revenue sharing provision of the compact. And that is why the Interior Department would not sign off and agree with they did not approve this compact. So, and shame on them, because you know what happens is that, again, so much for that trust responsibility, right? That trust relationship. So the Interior Department that's supposed to look out for Native people, instead of saying, we're going to reject this compact and we're going to tell the Senate and the state, go back to the table because we think the state's taking advantage of you. And that may have been their sentiment, but they didn't say that. They just rejected it. They did write some provisions or give their opinion on it. But that was the biggest concern that the Interior Department has. But I'll tell you, NIGA has come out on the National Indian Gaming Association supports the Seneca's view on this thing. The NCAI, the National Native American NCAI, National Congress of the American Indian. I got to always remember what the letters mean. So they support the Seneca Nation's position on this thing. I think Deister is in a very, very lonely place trying to pull the BS that he's trying to pull here.
The biggest thing I think also for the people to understand, the Seneca people and any other Indian, is that we don't need to be taken care of. We can conduct a business. In all businesses, you have to be careful and make sure it works right. Mm-hmm. And this is one of the things that you have to address, is we don't need this money being shipped out of our business. I mean, take a look at all the businesses that they could go after if they did that.
Well, and here's the reality. Paul Deister, you're not getting $20 million from the Seneca Nation. And and on the track that you are, you're going to cost the city of Niagara Falls. You're going to cost them. You're not going to get the $20 million, but you're going to be facing lawsuits, and you're going to face the wrath of Native people. You don't need folks from the Tuscarora and Seneca Nation and Mohawk Nation and everybody else showing up on your doorstep to raise hell with you because you're trying to be a tyrant here. You don't have the support that you think you have, and what you're doing is wrong. And you're going to end up costing the city. The city is in dire straits already. That's why you're acting so desperate in the first place. So, again, you owe the Seneca people an apology. I know that didn't go well the first time I suggested it, but you still do, and you do again. All right, that pretty much wraps it up. Hey, we'll be back here on Monday, and I don't know. We'll see where this story goes by then. But we also want to go back to talking about solutions. We had a great start with the Removing the Dust conference, and we want to get back on some of those issues. But, when issues arise, we got to address them. So that's what we've done here tonight, and I thank you for indulging us in this conversation. We'll see you soon. Yahweh.
Yahweh.